"Human, please. My mom's trapped in a trap." The little alien pleaded the city of Ethria was a sprawling metropolis that stretched across the edge of the galaxy, where the lights of countless stars shimmered brightly in the distance. It was a place where humans and aliens coexisted, yet the complexities of interspecies relations often brewed tensions beneath the surface. Among the towering buildings and vibrant marketplaces, the air buzzed with the hum of spaceships gliding in and out, and the murmur of various languages mingled in the streets. Marcus stood near the edge of a busy plaza, watching the alien species, whose varied shapes and sizes constantly amazed him. He was a young man, barely 20, but his reputation had already spread among the locals. Not for his skills with technology or weapons, but for something far simpler, his kindness. Marcus had an inherent empathy for others, a rare trait that seemed to make people trust him easily, regardless of where they came from. But even he never imagined that one quiet afternoon his life would change forever. A soft voice reached his ears, breaking through the chaotic hum of the city. "Please, human, I need help." Marcus turned toward the voice, startled. Standing before him was a young alien girl, barely 10 years old. Her large eyes shimmered with desperation, her skin a light shade of purple with patches of silver that sparkled as the sun caught them. She wore a tattered cloak that hung loosely around her thin frame, a sign of someone who had been through hardship. "Please, human," she repeated, her voice trembling as she clutched her hands to her chest. "My mom, she's trapped. They've taken her. You have to help her, they won't let her go." Marcus took a step forward, his heart tightening. He had seen suffering before, he lived in a world where it was common, but something about this little alien girl struck him in a way he couldn't explain. "What happened?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but steady. He had to know more. "They came to my planet," she began, her words rushed and fearful. "The ones who call themselves the Zorthak, they are cruel. They captured her because she's important. They think she holds the key to something they need, something powerful. I don't know what it is, but they said they would kill her if I didn't bring someone to help." Marcus frowned. The Zorthak were infamous across the galaxy, an outlaw faction who didn't hesitate to do whatever it took to achieve their goals. They were ruthless, and their reach had extended far and wide. But for some reason, this girl, so young and vulnerable, was asking for help from him. "Why me?" he asked, trying to make sense of it. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "Because you're human, you don't fear them the way others do. You're different. Please," she added, her voice breaking. "She's all I have left. I don't want to lose her." Marcus felt a deep pang in his chest as he looked down at the girl. He knew what it was like to lose someone you loved. His parents had passed away when he was just a child, and he had been raised in a group home, never really fitting in. He had learned to survive on his own, relying on his instincts and empathy. But this felt different. This wasn't just about survival, it was about something bigger. He looked around, making sure no one was paying attention to their conversation. The last thing he wanted was to draw attention to himself and the girl. "Where are they holding her?" Marcus asked, his decision made. The girl wiped her eyes quickly, a look of relief washing over her. "They've taken her to a moon in the Beta Ras system. It's a desolate place hidden from prying eyes. Only the Zorthak know where it is." Marcus nodded slowly. He knew the Beta Ras system, isolated, forgotten, a perfect hiding spot for someone like the Zorthak. He had no idea how he was going to get to that moon, let alone free the girl's mother from their grasp, but he couldn't just turn his back on her. "I'll help you," Marcus said, his voice firm. The girl's face brightened. "You will?" she asked, hope returning to her eyes. "I will," Marcus confirmed, his heart heavy but determined. "But we'll need to plan. I'm not going into this blind, and you'll have to tell me everything you know about the Zorthak and their base." She nodded eagerly, and together they started walking toward the nearest transport station. The bustling streets of Ethria suddenly felt quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Marcus wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to leave this girl to face the Zorthak alone. As they approached the transport station, Zara, the girl's name, as he had learned, looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. "Thank you, human," she said quietly. "You don't know what this means to me. You're the only one who can help." Marcus gave a small smile, though the weight of their mission was already starting to settle on his shoulders. He had always been someone who helped when he could, but this was different. This wasn't just about helping someone with a broken machine or lost belongings. This was life or death. "We'll get her back," Marcus said quietly, his resolve growing stronger with each step. They boarded the transport, and as the engines roared to life, taking them away from the city and into the unknown, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something far bigger than either of them had imagined. The transport ship hummed quietly as it made its way out of Ethria's bustling orbit, leaving behind the shining city that Marcus had called home for as long as he could remember. The outside view was a vast sea of stars, punctuated by the occasional asteroid belt or distant planet. Marcus stared out of the small window, trying to steady his thoughts. His mind raced with questions. What were the Zorthak really after? Why had they targeted Zara's mother? And most importantly, how could he possibly stop them? Zara sat next to him, her small body tense, her eyes fixed on the view outside as well. She hadn't spoken much since they left Ethria, her silence speaking volumes. The girl had endured so much already, and Marcus could see the fear in her eyes whenever she thought about what awaited them. "How did you find me?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. He had been curious about that for a while. Zara had mentioned how she'd come to him, but Marcus hadn't fully understood how she had known where to find him, or why she believed he was the one to help. Zara hesitated, her eyes flickering toward him briefly before she looked away. "My people, they've watched humans for a long time," she said, her voice soft, almost reluctant to share more. "They admire you, the way you fight, the way you care. Humans. You have a strength that no other species has. I knew I had to find one of you, I just didn't know who." Marcus looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You were looking for me?" He shook his head slightly, surprised. "Why me, though? I'm just a guy." Zara turned her eyes back to the stars outside, her fingers tightening around the worn fabric of her cloak. "My mother told me that humans can sometimes do things no one else can. She says that in times of great need, you will rise to the occasion, even when it seems impossible. I didn't understand it fully before, but now I think I do." Marcus absorbed her words, feeling an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest. He hadn't seen himself as anything special. He was just an ordinary person, someone who got by day to day, doing what he could to make the world a little better. But hearing Zara speak with such conviction made him wonder if there was more to him than he realized. He had always been the kind of person who helped others when he could, but this felt different. This wasn't just about being kind to a neighbor or helping a stranger with their groceries. Zara's mother was in danger, and he was the only one who could help her. If he failed, it wouldn't just be a missed opportunity, it could cost someone their life. After a long silence, Zara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "They told me she was the key, that's why they took her, but I don't understand. What does that even mean?" Marcus didn't have an answer for her. The key was a mystery to him, too, but it was clear that the Zorthak were after something powerful, something worth risking everything for. He couldn't let Zara's mother fall into their hands, not when it seemed like her life held so much importance. "We'll find out," Marcus said, trying to reassure her as much as himself. "We'll get to the bottom of this." Zara nodded, though her face was still filled with doubt. She leaned back in her seat, eyes closing for a moment as if trying to gather the strength she needed. Marcus took the opportunity to refocus. They had a lot of ground to cover, and even though they were still a long way from the Beta RAS system, he needed to prepare. There would be no turning back once they arrived. Hours later, the ship entered the Beta RAS system, and Marcus could feel the tension in the air. The stars around them grew dimmer as they approached a barren, desolate moon, a place that looked untouched by life. Its surface was a cold gray, dotted with jagged rocks and steep cliffs. It didn't look like a place where someone would want to be trapped, yet it was exactly where Zara's mother was being held. Marcus had heard stories of secret locations like this one, remote, hard to find, and even harder to escape from. The Zorthak were known for their hidden strongholds, places where they could control not just their prisoners, but entire systems without anyone knowing. As the ship descended toward the moon's surface, Marcus noticed the faint outline of a massive fortress in the distance, built into the side of a towering mountain. It was almost like the moon itself had been carved open to reveal the dark heart of the Zorthak's operations. Zara sat up straighter, her eyes locked onto the fortress. "That's where they are keeping her, I know it. We're getting close." Marcus nodded, his own heart racing in his chest. There was no turning back now. He wasn't sure how they would get inside, but he knew one thing: they would have to move fast. Every second counted. The ship touched down with a soft thud, its landing gear sinking into the loose dust of the moon's surface. Marcus quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, his body tense with anticipation. Zara followed his lead, her small hand gripping the edge of the seat for support. "We have to be careful," Marcus warned, glancing out the viewport at the fortress in the distance. "Once we leave this ship, it's not going to be easy," Zara nodded. "I know, but we can't waste time. My mother's life is in danger." Marcus turned toward the exit and took a deep breath. "Let's go." They suited up in their gear, taking the necessary weapons and supplies. Zara had insisted on carrying some of her people's tools, small gadgets that could help them bypass security systems. Marcus didn't know how effective they'd be, but he was willing to trust her instincts. They didn't have the luxury of doubt. The air outside was cold and sharp, biting at their skin as they stepped onto the moon's surface. The wind howled through the barren landscape, and the fortress loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. They started moving toward it, staying low to the ground, their steps barely making a sound in the dust. As they neared the entrance, Marcus could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There was no plan, no backup. It was just the two of them against an enemy that had already captured someone important. But as Zara looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and hope, he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when she believed in him. They reached the outer walls of the fortress, and Marcus motioned for Zara to use one of her devices. She pulled it out, a small, circular object, and placed it against the wall. A soft light blinked from it, then a faint click echoed as a hidden door slid open. They had made it inside, but this was just the beginning. The real challenge was still ahead. The dark, damp air inside the Zorthak fortress was thick with tension. As Marcus and Zara moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps barely making a sound on the cold metal floors, they both knew that every decision from here on out could be the difference between life and death. The fortress was massive, a labyrinth of rooms and hallways that seemed to go on forever, stretching deep into the mountain itself. It was designed to trap intruders, to confuse them, and perhaps even break their will. But Marcus wasn't about to let that happen. Not now. "Do you have any idea where they're keeping her?" Marcus whispered, his voice low and steady, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Zara was walking ahead, her eyes scanning the area. Her face was pale, her small hands trembling as she held onto a small device from her people. "I think it's in the central chamber," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "It's the most secure place in the fortress. Only high-ranking members of the Zorthak can get inside." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He had no idea how he was going to face the Zorthak forces in a place this dangerous, but he was certain of one thing: they had to reach Zara's mother before it was too late. As they rounded a corner, they paused. Ahead, two Zorthak guards stood watch, their alien forms hulking and imposing. They carried weapons that Marcus had never seen before, sleek black devices that hummed with energy, ready to discharge at a moment's notice. The guards were talking, their voices deep and gruff, but the words were incomprehensible to Marcus. He could hear their occasional laughter, oblivious to the danger lurking right beneath their noses. "How do we get past them?" Marcus asked in a whisper, his eyes narrowing. They couldn't afford to be detected. If they were caught, it would all be over. Zara looked around, her mind working quickly. "There's a ventilation shaft above them. I can hack into the system, open the panel, and we can crawl through." "It will be tight, but it's our best option." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." Zara moved with purpose, pulling out her tool. She knelt beside the wall, her fingers moving swiftly as she worked. Within moments, the faint hum of a lock disengaging echoed in the quiet hallway. She grinned up at Marcus, showing that spark of hope he had seen before. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, and they quickly moved toward the panel. Zara pried it open, revealing a narrow shaft above them. It was dark and cramped, but it was their only way forward. Marcus went first, carefully hoisting himself up into the shaft, followed by Zara. The walls were close and every breath felt heavy, but they couldn't stop. Not now. They crawled through the shaft, their progress slow but steady. Marcus's mind wandered, though he tried not to think too much. He had never been in a place like this before, and the danger was overwhelming. But what kept him going was the thought of Zara's mother, someone who, despite being an alien, had become a symbol of hope for her daughter. The Zorthak had taken her, but they would not succeed. Marcus wouldn't allow it. Eventually, they reached the end of the shaft. The panel above them slid open, and they were greeted by the flicker of dim lights. They had made it to the central chamber. It was vast, larger than anything Marcus had imagined. The walls were lined with monitors, glowing softly, and in the center of the room stood a massive control console. It was a hub of activity, with several Zorthak officials standing around, speaking in hushed tones as they manipulated data on the screens. In the far corner of the room, Marcus could see Zara's mother. She was shackled to a chair, her head bowed, but even from across the room, it was clear that she was still very much alive. Zara's breath caught in her throat when she saw her mother, and Marcus could see the anguish in her eyes. But they couldn't stop now. They had to act. "We need to get closer," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Zara nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'll disable the security grid. It should buy us some time." She pulled out the small device again, tapping at the screen with her fingers. The system responded with a soft beep, and for a moment Marcus thought nothing would happen. But then the security lights dimmed, and the hum of energy that had filled the room subsided. The Zorthak were still too distracted to notice, but they had been given a window. It wouldn't be long before they realized what was happening. "Let's move," Marcus said, his voice steady. He led the way, moving with quiet urgency. Every step brought them closer to Zara's mother, closer to the danger. But it also brought them closer to the hope of saving her. As they reached the center of the room, the first Zorthak guard noticed them. His eyes widened in shock, and his hand shot to the weapon at his side. But before he could draw it, Marcus lunged forward, knocking him to the ground. Zara scrambled to help, grabbing the guard's weapon and quickly securing him. The other officials barely had time to react before Marcus and Zara moved on. They reached Zara's mother, and the look of relief in her eyes as she saw her daughter was almost too much to bear. But they didn't have time for a reunion. Zara worked quickly, unlocking the restraints that held her mother in place. She didn't speak, but her hands trembled as she touched her mother's face. "We need to get out of here," Marcus urged, pulling them both away from the console. But before they could make it to the exit, the doors at the far end of the room slammed open, and more Zorthak soldiers poured in, weapons raised. "Get to the ship," Marcus shouted. He fired at the nearest soldier, pushing Zara and her mother toward the exit. The fight was far from over, but Marcus knew they couldn't stop now. If they did, they would all be trapped. As the Zorthak rushed toward them, Marcus ducked behind a pillar, his heart pounding in his chest. Zara's mother was already moving toward the door, pulling her daughter along with her. But the soldiers weren't far behind. Marcus was about to make his move when he heard a voice, a deep, cold voice that sent a chill down his spine. "Do you think you can just walk away from this?" The Zorthak commander stepped into the room, his eyes locked onto Marcus. "You've made a grave mistake, human, and you will pay for it." Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon. "I'm not leaving without her," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that bubbled beneath the surface. "Not now, not ever." The battle had only just begun, and Marcus knew that they still had a long way to go. But as long as he had Zara and her mother by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The chaos in the central chamber had escalated rapidly. Marcus and Zara, with her mother now free from the restraints, dashed for the exit, but the Zorthak soldiers weren't going to let them escape so easily. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them, a constant reminder that time was running out. As they rounded the corner of the hallway, Marcus pushed Zara and her mother ahead of him. He could hear the shouts of the Zorthak commander ordering his troops to pursue them. His heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, as he glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was gaining on them. Zara's mother, though visibly weakened, was moving quickly, her eyes darting around as if she too was trying to figure out the quickest route out of the fortress. "Keep moving," Marcus urged, his voice tight with urgency. They had no time to waste. Zara's mother, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "We need to get to the old hangar bay," she said, her voice steady despite the situation. "It's our best chance. The Zorthak don't know about it." Marcus looked at her, relief flooding his chest. "Lead the way." The old hangar bay was located on the far side of the fortress, and as they ran, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded toward something. The halls seemed to grow narrower, the lights dimmer, as if the fortress itself was trying to trap them inside. Every turn, every corner led them deeper into the heart of the Zorthak stronghold. Zara, who had been keeping close, looked up at him. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Marcus met her gaze, his face hardening with determination. "We have to." As they rounded another corner, they were met with a group of Zorthak soldiers. Their weapons were raised, and the gleam of danger in their eyes was unmistakable. Marcus immediately dropped to a crouch, pulling out his own weapon, one he had grabbed from the Zorthak guard earlier. He fired, the shot hitting one of the soldiers square in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. "Go now!" Marcus shouted. Without hesitation, Zara's mother grabbed Zara's arm, pulling her toward a door that was just ahead. Marcus fired again, taking out another soldier, but the others were quickly closing in. The sound of their footsteps was deafening, and the pounding of his heart seemed to echo in his ears. He couldn't afford to slow down now. The door slid open, revealing the hangar bay. It was massive, filled with old, abandoned ships. The air inside was thick with dust, and the faint smell of fuel lingered in the corners of the room. Zara's mother rushed toward one of the ships, her movements hurried but precise. Marcus followed, keeping an eye on the door behind them. "Get inside," Zara's mother ordered. "I'll start the ship, you keep them back." Zara hesitated, looking at her mother. "But go," she commanded, her voice firm. Marcus grabbed Zara by the arm and pulled her toward the ship. They didn't have time to argue. The Zorthak were already closing in, and the only thing that mattered now was getting out. Inside the ship, Zara's mother quickly began working on the controls, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Marcus didn't know much about ships, but he knew enough to recognize that the Zorthak would not let them escape without a fight. "We need to hurry," he said, scanning the hangar for any sign of approaching soldiers. Just as the ship's engines hummed to life, the door behind them exploded open. The Zorthak soldiers poured into the room, their weapons raised, ready to finish what they had started. Marcus didn't waste a second. He aimed and fired, hitting one of the soldiers in the shoulder. The man staggered back, but others quickly took his place. "Hold them off," Zara's mother shouted as she worked to get the ship into the air. "We're almost there." Marcus took up a defensive position near the entrance, firing at anyone who got too close. His mind raced. There were too many of them. Even if they managed to escape this room, there were countless more soldiers outside, and the fortress itself was too vast to know where they could hide. Just as a soldier moved to flank him, Marcus heard a roar, the unmistakable sound of a Zorthak battle cry. He turned to see the commander charging toward him, a weapon unlike anything he had ever seen in his hands. It was a long, jagged blade, glowing with a dangerous energy. The Zorthak commander's eyes locked onto him, burning with fury. "You think you can escape?" the commander snarled, his voice echoing through the hangar. "This is where you die, human." Marcus's grip tightened around his weapon, his muscles tensing. He didn't have much time. The ship was almost ready to take off, but the commander wasn't about to let them leave without a fight. The commander swung his blade, and Marcus barely managed to dodge in time. The blade sliced through the air, missing him by inches. Marcus fired, but the commander deflected the shots with a quick motion, his strength overwhelming. "Get back!" Marcus shouted, trying to create distance between them. He couldn't take on the commander alone, but as the commander advanced, Marcus realized that he had no choice. If they didn't stop him now, they wouldn't make it out of the fortress. With a surge of adrenaline, Marcus lunged forward, tackling the commander to the ground. The two grappled, struggling for control of the weapon. Marcus's heart was racing, but he knew he couldn't back down. He had to protect Zara and her mother. The commander snarled, his hands tightening around Marcus's throat. Marcus gasped for air, his vision beginning to blur. He couldn't hold on much longer. But just as everything seemed lost, a blinding light filled the room. Zara's mother had activated the ship's weapon systems. The blast hit the commander square in the chest, sending him flying backward. His weapon clattered to the floor as he hit the wall with a heavy thud. Marcus coughed, gasping for air, his hands shaking as he climbed to his feet. Zara's mother didn't wait. She activated the ship's engines once more, and the ship surged upward, breaking free from the hangar bay and soaring into the atmosphere. The Zorthak fortress grew smaller and smaller beneath them as they ascended, but Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. There were still Zorthak ships in pursuit. They had won the battle, but the war was far from finished. As the ship climbed higher, Zara moved to Marcus's side, her hand finding his. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. Marcus nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were only just beginning their journey. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, looking out the viewport at the dark expanse of space ahead of them. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, he allowed himself a moment of relief. They had survived. And as long as they were alive, they still had a chance to finish what they started. The ship soared through the vastness of space, leaving behind the desolate moon and the Zorthak fortress. The hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the cockpit, but inside, there was an eerie silence. Marcus sat at the controls, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as though he expected the Zorthak to catch up at any moment. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him, but he couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. Zara sat next to him, her mother beside her. The young alien girl's face was pale, but her eyes were bright with a mixture of relief and worry. Her mother, who had been silent since the escape, was still adjusting to her freedom. Her body was weak, and it was clear that she had been through far too much during her captivity. But she was alive. They had made it out. "We're not safe yet," Marcus said quietly, breaking the silence. "The Zorthak will come after us. They won't give up." Zara's mother nodded, her face solemn. "The Zorthak are relentless. They have resources, ships, and soldiers, but we can't stop now. They've taken too much from my people, and we won't let them take any more." Her voice was strong despite the exhaustion she clearly felt, and Marcus couldn't help but admire her determination. She was a leader, someone who had survived the worst and was still fighting for what she believed in. "Where are we going?" Zara asked, her voice soft, almost unsure. Her mother turned to her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We need to meet with the others. There is a resistance forming, a group that has been working to bring the Zorthak down. It's time we join them." Marcus glanced at the coordinates on the screen. They were heading toward a hidden planet, one that even the Zorthak had trouble finding. It was a safe haven, a place where the resistance could regroup and plan their next move. Marcus didn't know much about the resistance, but if they were anything like Zara's mother, they would be willing to fight until the end. As the ship continued its journey, Marcus felt the weight of the moment. They had survived the fortress, but they weren't out of danger yet. The Zorthak were powerful, and they wouldn't rest until they had their revenge. But Marcus wasn't afraid anymore. He had learned something during the escape, something that had been inside him all along. He wasn't just some random person caught in the middle of a galactic war. He had a purpose. "I'll help you," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, I'm not going anywhere." Zara's mother turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and understanding. "I know you will. We'll need all the help we can get." The rest of the journey was quiet. The stars outside the viewport stretched endlessly, their light flickering like tiny fireflies in the darkness. But the peace didn't last long. After what seemed like hours, a red light began to flash on the ship's console. "We've got company," Marcus muttered, his voice tense. He quickly tapped the controls, bringing up the display of incoming ships. It wasn't just one ship. There were 5, all Zorthak. They had found them. "Brace yourselves," Marcus said, his voice low. "We're not done yet." The ship jolted as the first wave of laser fire struck their shields. Marcus gritted his teeth, pulling the ship into a sharp dive to avoid another blast. The Zorthak were fast, their ships designed for speed and aggression, and they were closing in quickly. "Can you fight back?" Zara's mother asked, her voice calm, but the urgency was clear. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." He tapped a series of commands into the ship's console, activating the defensive systems. The ship's shields flared with energy as another blast hit. The ship groaned under the pressure, but the shields held. "Take the controls," Marcus said, standing up from the pilot's seat. "I'll handle the guns." Zara looked at him, confusion in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've done this before," he said with a half-smile. "Now go." Zara hesitated for a moment, but then nodded and moved into the pilot's seat. Marcus quickly moved to the back of the cockpit, where the ship's gunner station was located. He strapped in, pulling on the controls. The guns powered up, and he felt the familiar weight of the weapons in his hands. The Zorthak ships were fast, but they weren't invincible. He just needed to get in close. "Marcus, we've got 2 ships on our tail," Zara called from the front, her voice strained. "I see them," he replied, locking onto one of the Zorthak ships. He fired a quick burst from the ship's blasters, striking the enemy vessel. It veered off course, a trail of smoke trailing behind it. But the other ships were closing in fast. Zara swerved the ship again, narrowly avoiding another blast. "We can't outrun them forever." Marcus gritted his teeth, his fingers flying over the controls. He needed to take them out before they had a chance to regroup. He fired again, this time hitting the lead Zorthak ship directly in its engines. The ship exploded, its remains scattering into space. "We got one down," Marcus shouted, his voice filled with adrenaline, but the other ships were still on their tail. The battle wasn't over yet. Zara's mother turned toward him, her face grim. "You've done enough, Marcus. Let's get to the resistance." Marcus nodded, his eyes focused on the remaining ships. He didn't need to be told twice. They had a larger fight ahead of them. The Zorthak wouldn't stop, but neither would they. The Zorthak ships were now scattered, unsure of their next move. Marcus fired one last round, hitting a ship's reactor, causing it to explode in a flash of light. The remaining ships retreated, knowing that they were no match for the human and alien ship. But the victory felt hollow. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. "We've got to keep moving," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside him. "The Zorthak will regroup, and next time we won't have the element of surprise." Zara's mother nodded, her expression serious. "Then we make sure we're ready for them." The ship veered toward the hidden planet, its engines roaring as it broke through the atmosphere. They had made it this far, but Marcus knew they were just getting started. The real fight was only beginning. As the ship touched down on the surface of the hidden resistance base, Marcus took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. They were safe, for now. But the Zorthak were still out there, and the galaxy was a dangerous place. Zara looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly. "You saved us." Marcus smiled, the weight of everything they had been through settling over him. "I didn't do it alone, we're in this together." Together they had survived, together they would keep fighting.